Welcome back to House Education on January 21st. We're just going to take some time in the committee to kind of check in, talk about Act 73 steps moving forward. So just, I'll just sort of tell everybody kind of my own, we're all in a very hard situation. This is a incredibly hard topic in that we have both a local perspective of the people and districts and all that we represent, and we're also here to make decisions on behalf of the entire state. And I think it's putting all of us, because we all are affected one way or the other in a difficult position. And I just want to recognize that we all have that. For example, the current foundation formula as proposed probably would hurt the main school district I represent pretty significantly. For others, the fear that a sort of board that is more remote from the communities it represents could lead to decisions that affect small communities that don't have the same level of representation. So I just wanted, this is all, but at the same time, we all know the larger statewide factors of, the cost of education in Vermont. I put these numbers up here for everybody to just have for comparison's sake, with no comment whether the numbers are big or little, but just to sort of understand kind of where we're at. And if you're looking at, for example, the Agency of Education puts out there per pupil spending for all of the school districts in the state. If you ever want to sort of compare where you fall with that, there are the numbers to use. And then, of course, the bottom row, just to get a sense of where we're at in terms of enrollment. So I think we're going to do a little round table today to go around and get people's thoughts. Representative Brady and I were talking earlier today about what might be a good prompt for all of us to sort of think about. Those of you who are teachers are much better at this than I am. And but I can't quite remember what the prompt exactly was.
There's a lot in Act 73. There's a lot in the task force report. There's a lot swirling around. What do you think the 1 to 3 most pressing next steps are, and why? Whether they're what's already in Act 73 or what's in the task force report or other pieces, but what 1 to 3 specific steps do you think are facing us this session?
Yeah,
That's a big one.
it's a big one. And you can do 1 and you don't have to do 3, but I think it'd be good to do it. I don't know if anybody feels like they have the capacity to go first. Shall we start off with just 1 and then maybe we'll go around?
I'll start it off.
Okay.
To me, I think that we have to go less districts, go bigger districts, less districts. I think that's a must. And we need to really decide on that voluntary, involuntary point. And I can state that my belief right now, as we sit here, that I don't believe it should be a voluntary.
It should not be.
We need to, I think those are big decision points we have to make very soon.
So just to add, just to put a little more flesh on it. So that means it's something we have a no go on maps. I don't think you can move to necessarily involuntary or let's call it mandated districts without saying what those are going to be. You just want to go for it. And this is open to y'all on the screen as well. So put your hand up if you'd like to jump in. Emily?
I'm happy to share a thought. This was a thought process, so there's lots of other things that will pop into my head, but just off the top of my head, I want to acknowledge and recognize that Act 73, the impetus behind Act 73 from the very beginning that we've been in for the last year and a half has been to curb spending and lower property taxes. That's my perception. I think most people would agree with that, and most of my constituents agree with that. But and I'm not trying to minimize all the other reasons, because as you all know, I've been working on this for 30 some odd years, trying to improve our education delivery system. And that has not gone off the table. So for me, I need to know that the steps we are taking are going to do those two things, which is improve the opportunities and outcomes for our students equitably across the state, and that they will lower property taxes by steps we take will lower property taxes, whether it's immediately over time, so that Vermonters can afford the education we're providing. And I continue to have great concerns about making significant change in our education system that will cause a whole lot of disruption and still not get the results of either of those things. Those questions are not answered from me. So do no harm always rises to the top.
Thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Are we able to do that? When you lower taxes or stabilize taxes?
My first opening statement, which is my statement, not anyone else's, was that I think the drive to do this work in the most recent steps, and I'm really limiting it to this last year and a half, has been to lower property taxes. So much is contained in that conversation.
And I'm not trying to call you out on it.
No, I got that.
To me, those
It's a
are-
legitimate
to me, those are
question.
Big
No,
difference.
I don't think all that. I don't. Thank you.
Representative McCann, since you got your hand up and volunteered, please.
Sure. I'm just going to list 3 things that come to mind since 3 was the prompt. I lean towards school districts over supervisory unions. I lean towards mandatory seesaws rather than mandatory districts. And I'd like us to look at where we have school deserts and think about how we can move from having some non-operating districts to making sure that all districts are operating.
Thank you, Kate. Beth, you also have your hand up, so we'll take advantage of that.
Thank you. My first instinct when I heard the prompt was very similar to what Rep. Taylor had to say, that looking at fewer districts and supervisory union / districts, whatever it ends up being, to streamline the process, and looking at it statewide again, as opposed to voluntary across the board, because deserts, of that idea of having deserts created or towns left out when the voluntary pieces start, if we don't look at it as a statewide whole. That's where I'm at. Go on maps.
So can I just make sure I heard you correctly? What you're saying is, yes, the fewer districts probably should be mandated as part of a statewide strategic vision as opposed to voluntary, which may or may not meet that?
I certainly would love to have, and think it's most important to have community input, boots on the ground people, but have to really look and say, is somebody being really left out of this and creating an orphan? So we say, we have to make sure that's taken care of.
Yeah. Thank you. Leland, how are you feeling?
I feel that mandatory, it's probably a mandatory districting as opposed to volunteer, because I think when you do it on a volunteer basis, I don't think that would work. And as far as lowering taxes, my major concern would be more in stabilizing and hoping that in the future that it would reduce. But at this point, I think the stabilization is most important thing. Not all I would have to say at this moment.
Leah, you ready?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that I'm sort of with Emily in that I am not convinced yet that mandatory redistricting is going to get us the costs that we need. And I'm not sure how that is being calculated to show us extension. I think that I would like to look at the seesaws, which also in this plan are not voluntary, they're mandatory. And so I think that maybe framing like what are we mandating the towns do, going in that direction more than the redistricting. So I guess I'd like to collect the data to really compare which one of his plans would actually be more effective, not only in the cost savings for like this year and the next few years, but I think that we also really need to carefully consider what it looks like in the next few decades. And I know we don't have a crystal ball, but we should be able to sort of at least have a discussion around what happens when we start to do this to our most rural areas. Like, is it going to lead to growth or is it going to lead to an even scarcer desert population? I don't know who to ask to answer that question.
Crystal ball. Not sure you could get a satisfactory answer.
But I think it's really important. I don't think that we should shoot first and ask questions later.
Before you go on to someone else, can I clarify just something?
Yes.
I don't, this is absolutely nothing, appreciate you mentioning me. I did not mention a word about mandatory or not. Okay, that wasn't part of my,
Right.
and I don't want anyone to assume
Yeah,
that that
yeah.
was what I was saying, and I, you know, as long as I that is a next step conversation.
Yeah.
Because I've gone through the process, both voluntary and watched the process happen when it was mandatory, and I don't yet know whether in the time frame that we have, whether we can do voluntary, because voluntary requires a lot of work with our communities and including our communities in the voice. And if I can clarify just one more thing, when we talk about closing schools that are happening right now, this has been sort of nagging at the back of my head. We hear this statement from us in this room and from the secretary and the agency of education and from the field that we don't want to continue to have small schools close in crisis. And I really want to push back on that. And saying demographics are causing it, but it's a longer process and it feels very emotional to our communities, but it is from a demographic reason. And the time I have witnessed in my region of schools closing, the conversations in those communities have been incredibly helpful. And I don't really, it may feel like in the beginning that it's from crisis, but in the end, the final decisions, when this decision is to either open or close the school, come from, a community conversation. And I will use the town of Marlborough as a great example for it. They've gone community meeting after community meeting after community meeting that I was asked to attend and I did attend. And they went from one end of the spectrum thinking about every single option. And now they are at a point of where they're putting it on their warrant. But it feels like crisis because of the emotion. But the process has been incredibly helpful and healing in some ways to them because the conversation was right. It was focused on kids and cost. Kids and cost.
When I said I agreed with Emily, I meant about the data collection.
I knew exactly
Okay.
what you meant, honestly, I really didn't, but I just wanted to clarify because. Thank you.
Rob, how you feeling?
thinking about, I'm just kind of looking at my notes from a lot of the superintendents and, just kind of thinking about the stuff I've been kind of rolling over my head. And like the question I asked Rebecca yesterday about, about if we do new SDs and we create new districts, can they also be a hybrid and include CSAs, right? Like they should. I mean, if we're saying, but I'm also mired in the fact that, well, to get a CSA up and running, you need some staffing, so, there is something to what Zoe Saunders said about, another level of bureaucracy. On the other hand, if we can be made to work, I think that's important. I think that they should just be elements of new districts as we go in. So I think that I'm dipping my toes in that water. They repeated a lot of different things that each of them said, be careful of timeline, all SDs, no SUs, and strategic mergers versus voluntary. And so, I am thinking that we need to move forward. I am sensitive to all of the things that have been said, the emotional issues that go with towns and people having a voice and as they go forward. I also feel a little trapped, as I probably said the other day, everything that Rebecca says makes sense. But on the other hand, we have a mandate in front of us. We have rising taxes, we have affordability issues, and I just think, well, then maybe we need to move forward and continue this play. But being smart, and not just saying, poof, 5 regions. This is a quote, strategic mergers and considering our regions, considering the small by necessity, all of those things. And, maybe Hooper wasn't far off, maybe we do all have imaginations. Maybe we do need to bring this stuff, so at least when we walk away in May, if we've done something, at least it was us. It is nice to be able to point to a commission and say, well, hey, I did what I could. They kind of did the work and one of those things. So, I'm in favor of rolling up sleeves and I know it's hard. Yeah, that's hard. I don't know what I said.
Sounded good though.
I heard a lot of both sides and.
I said, well, here we go. Okay. There we go.
Josh, you want to go next? You are muted.
The way you guys like it anyways. I'd like to start with ensuring that a foundation formula is in place at the end of all this. I think that if at the very least that is a way to help stabilize everything financially. How that hashes out is another story. And I know that we don't set the foundation formula, but trying to find a way to ensure that is at least something that comes out of all this. Less districts / SUs. I do think that there is a place for a hybrid model that has both, especially when it comes to our more rural communities, supporting the independent schools that have been supporting the education system for more years than I've been alive. And there's a governance model that I think works within there. So those are and then also in a I moved here to be part of a small community that had local control. But as I've gone through many different merger conversations, and we are trying currently within the district and SU that I'm working in to figure things out, it's hard. And sometimes I think the hand has to be forced as much as there's some in my community who wouldn't like that. So I do think some kind of mandate that really, contemplates our more rural and smaller communities, which is why I like the hybrid SU SD models.
But fewer of them.
Yes, absolutely. I thought I said that, but if I didn't, yes, less of them.
Okay, yeah. Great. I'm gonna go next.
I thought you went at the beginning and said, this is hard, blah, blah. blah.
Yeah. Sherman's got your name, but you're-
That's what I wrote, yeah, I
Yeah,
just-
you already had a turn for you.
I'll add to your notes, keep going.
You know, I just had the benefit of hearing all of you, and it sort of keeps triggering my mind, you know, put over three. You know, I think probably for me, we need to move from the system that we have right now. I think in 2024, we saw what the future may hold, and the future is a couple of things. One, lots more school budget projections, which I think have all of the same negative connotations of that people bring up about having larger districts. It's, you know, it's hard on the people. I think school budget projections are probably way harder and way worse. And I think that that's the system that we have. And I think I worry that in the absence of us making some structural change, we're going to hear more things like, let's have an allowable growth formula of 3%, or let's put in a 3-year moratorium on property taxes not increasing. I think, as we all know, these don't take into account the real cost of education. I think a foundation formula does. I worry that if we don't move in the direction of fewer districts and a foundation formula, we're going to continue to have the really stark inequity that we have today, where kids can live a half a mile apart from one another, but they have completely different high school experiences or elementary school experiences. So, you know, those are two things that I worry about, and why I do feel we need to move to more districts. And, you know, it's really easy to say that because I'm not yet put my mind in the process of actually creating and how many and all of that. I also sort of think about the advantages of sort of starting from scratch with new districts, of various problems or features that we could, I don't want to say problems that we could solve, but in my mind, they are. We have got articles of agreement, for example, that are out there that I think in many cases are inhibiting school districts to make smart decisions in their planning. Sort of get a test of that in February when the Washington Central District has votes in 2 towns about whether their schools should close or not. Because I think that, you know, it's hard, but these votes are not necessarily based on what the kids get or don't get. So I think that, but on a bigger level, when I think of creating, I'm definitely a fan of eliminating SUs as a part of the system. It's just another layer of paperwork and all that. But, you know, I think about, okay, we have got this tuitioning system that causes lots of consternation with everybody. It's causing lawsuits. And that we move to actually the same system that Maine has moved to, which is to say, there are no non-operating districts, but that a school board has the role and responsibility of making sure every child has a school to go to. And in the absence of a public school, they should have the ability, as we've been doing with the historic academies for 200 years, to contract with an independent school. We have to put lots of, you know, what is a reasonably accessible public school? You probably will need to define how is that miles, bus time. So everything I bring up just brings up more and more layers of complication. But for me, it's an opportunity to sort of start fresh, solve a lot of things that have been getting away from us, inequity, sort of tuitioning choice. We put some curbs on it, but I think that if we go back to the sort of reason why the historic academies is to provide for the education of students where there is no other option, and that the role of the school board is to make sure that all children have a school available to go to. That sort of helps out a lot there. I guess we keep talking about it's going to lower property taxes and I want data to show it. I don't, even the governor has said it's not about cutting costs, it's about controlling costs. So I don't think we're going to get any guarantees. And here's where I struggle, and I hear everybody asking for data, and I can't deny that it's the way we should progress. But at what point do you have enough data? And what do we do when the data doesn't exist? Do we go forward? That's where I'm at. That's a lot. Yes. Clarifying question?
Dan and myself to go.
I hand up over here.
It's more of a response to something you just said, but I can hold off if it's not time to respond.
Yeah, let's keep going around the table here.
Okay.
Okay, my turn. So I was making notes while everyone was talking. So one sort of what I wrote down as a first level thing, I think particularly in light of what we heard yesterday, is moving to operationalize mandatory CSAs statewide kind of as a first step would be at the top of my list. I think, after hearing the conversation, I think, maybe this sounds like a little too divorced from actual practice and reality, but I think that concept offers us a really important opportunity to test some of the assumptions that we think we're going to achieve with bigger consolidated districts. And I definitely, hear and appreciate the point that we can't have the entire universe of data and, we can't run every model to determine, what's going to achieve efficiency, what's going to save money. I appreciate that we can't do all of that work before we move forward with anything, but I feel like this is a real world opportunity to sort of see how those things would work, in a way that is flexible and doesn't come without all the legal entanglements around the cost and legalities of district mergers. So I think, I don't know, that's where I'm sort of focusing a lot of my thoughts at the moment. I think it offers us an interesting opportunity where, there's definitely a lot of push towards action, which we can all appreciate for a variety of reasons. But where it makes me nervous is, action versus recklessness. And I think this offers kind of a unique and flexible way to sort of test out some of those assumptions to see, are we moving in the right direction? What can we achieve together? And I sort of think, if we can't regionalize services in a way that's sort of efficient and improving outcomes and hopefully saving money in this kind of a flexible model, I'm not really sure why we think we would be able to do all those things with new mandatory districts. So, and the second big thing on my list would be really looking at how we're supporting the implementation of Act 173. I think Representative Holcomb talked about that yesterday. I had some really interesting conversations over the summer with folks that feel like a huge part of the cost crisis that we're in right now is based on the failed implementation of 173. So Representative Holcomb was talking about sort of how we're an outlier in terms of identifying students out of district placements. I think, really looking at that system could have a lot of pretty immediate benefits. And do I get a third?
Yep.
Jane, so this is
We're
going.
going to play Rich talk as long as you like.
Oh, well, going back to something that Jay Nichols was saying this committee has talked about a lot, how we use the education fund and what revenue streams we put into it. I know a lot of committees are having various pieces of that conversation, but I think there's work we could do there. Or maybe not us, but in collaboration with perhaps the money committees. And I do one last thing. It's the last thing I'll say. And I do agree with the chair around starting to make some difficult choices around our tuitioning system and making it about access, not choice as sort of a standalone educational good of some sort, which is not what it was ever designed to be. That's it.
Thank you.
I'll give quick my 3 kind of action steps and then a little bit of editorial on them. I think we need fewer schools. you know, that's a hard thing to say. We need all districts to be operating. And we need to, I would echo that, we need to resolve the governance so that we have one structure and all districts are operating. And that does not mean that certainly the academies would play a role and are still going to be the high school in those areas, but a contracting or designation system. It was abundantly clear, I watched every single task force meeting, how much that issue compounds decisions and challenges in many, 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 many of our smallest districts. So those would be my three, and I will say pretty unequivocally, if we end up in some place with maps this year, I absolutely cannot support if we continue the SU structure or we continue choice as policy decisions. That to me is those are poison pills on maps. I went back to it's new people sitting around this table, but in 2024, when all the budgets failed, and we've been building up to that, but this committee literally took hundreds of hours of testimony from the field, from probably half the legislature in listening sessions. And I just went back and like pulled out, I even had AI run some sort of quick, like, what are the key points? And, you know, in 2024, particularly from superintendents, that the high level things that came up again and again, the challenges of our system are the number of buildings that we operate with, compounded with huge facility needs, and that drives personnel decisions and costs. The more schools you run, the more overhead you have. And this is superintendent's words. I don't even know which one from then or AI is combining it all, but we have a foot in the past and a foot in the future. And we're not going to be able to afford to do both. And in that same testimony, all of this came up again, of course, last year, when we kept saying, you know, solutions, regional, the things that rose to the top the most frequently were the funding for our mental health system, regional collaboratives, so that lends me towards being very interested in CSAs, and consolidating particularly middle and high schools. And that a high school should generally be at least 600 to 900 students. This is pulling from their recommendations 2 years ago. So when I think about all the stuff on the table, either in Act 73, in the task force report, to me, most of it's really hard stuff and not fun and not things you can go out and be like, hey, community, I got great news for you. This is like really hard change for communities, for our state. I think that regional, middle, and high schools are the only kind of positive thing that in the package. And so I guess to me, I have before, it's construction money, facilities money. We cannot get there without some investment. And we're already long overdue on deferred maintenance, and it doesn't mean we're going to have 15 giant new high schools, but there's no way to get to regional, middle, and high schools without some facilities funding to reconfigure some buildings, to make them more comprehensive. And so I'm very concerned about us spending lots of money on consolidating a lot of paperwork stuff in districts without ever actually putting money into any physical structures that need consolidation. And we don't really know the cost of consolidation. I'm worried. I'd rather spend our money on the middle and high schools and physical buildings that are going to put more kids together, which I genuinely believe, and I think research will say increases opportunity, more than necessarily district configuration just automatically would create it. I think we're stuck kind of ducking everyone, us, the governor, everyone, of like how small is too small, where is too small, like the small issue. I think we're in essence sort of wanting it to new districts, because everybody's avoiding the hardest decision probably in all this.
Great, thank you. That going back and reviewing the 24 testimony was really helpful.
I
Appreciate
can
that.
pull up we did like around the table, who said what, I can pull up everybody's.
You know, I think we're at the point where probably we should put some concepts on the table to discuss. Perhaps starting off with some easy ones, just to sort of get behind things. So I'm going to throw one out there just to sort of put it out there for debate. I would say if, not that we will, but if we were to go to fewer districts, for me, that would be contingent on having construction funding available. You know, like proposed, here's the school construction program, which is ready to roll. It just needs $6 billion. But for me, that's a bit of a contingency. But it doesn't mean that every district gets the money. It just means that we at least are acknowledging that to really kind of achieve the goals that Representative Brady just laid out, that we're talking about 24, we got some building money.
And I don't think we have to have 6 billion. I know that's the
No,
price tag,
no.
but like, let's, in order to keep ourselves from completely spitting out of just, hopelessness here.
Right.
Any money can
Anything.
help, especially with bonding and perhaps some different statewide bonding strategies and visions. We're hearing from people that I find hopeful.
Is this something that you could go to the governor with and say, look, we're ready to move forward here, but it has to be in conjunction with this. This has to happen to make this happen.
Sure.
And could you just get your feet gathered together and figure out how to create this?
Well, I think that the challenge with all these things, we always have to get granular. So like,
Yep.
How much is enough to say we have funded the school
100
construction?
million a year, 100 million a year,
That's a big number.
well,
Yeah.
it's lower than 6 billion,
Yes.
but it's.
Exactly. Good
I mean, I wasn't.
I think there is,
Right?
when we first were talking about that, I think there is some sort of, we could get some help with the bond bank that would say, if you seeded it with this much, it would leverage this much.
Right.
And at some point, we'll have to pick a number. At some point, we have to make decisions. Yeah, that's our job in this case, and makes for a hard job. The other thing I just want to make everybody aware of, because it's important, is that we are essentially at the timeline for bigger districts and creating voting wards if the legislature is to do all of that work itself in this session. To me, that we aren't going to make that deadline. So if we are to sort of go to mandated larger districts, it then would mean setting up a commission that then comes back with the voting wards all laid out in a bill form, and they get voted on immediately so that the next legislative session approves it and the Secretary of State can do their work to make it all happen. That is the way to stick to the current schedule laid out in Act 73. Doesn't mean that schedule can't be adjusted, but the election side of things gets complicated when we start moving away from, but the idea was to get on a November every other year schedule, even numbered year schedule.
As the bill exists now, it was school board elections in 27, right?
November 27th, special election.
Right, and then try to transition to an even year schedule in the future.
Yeah. That's all, it is all laid out in the bill. Do you want to throw out some thoughts, Chris?
I'm not completely ready to say contingent on construction money, but I definitely think we need to focus on how we can fund construction. And I think it needs to be a part of the conversation the whole way through. Doesn't mean I won't get to that point of being contingent on construction money either. I just see it as such a big factor in the whole scheme of things.
We could do nothing, but there's certainly no question we need school construction money.
Regardless.
Yeah. Josh, go ahead.
So I'm with Chris. I don't know that I'm ready to jump into contingent on construction money. I mean, I could get there. Some of my concerns are, where do we get those funds from when we're already trying to stabilize everything? Like where does that money come from? What taxes, what fund, etc. And is there a way we can, and again, this is an unknown until we see savings, if there are going to be any, how can that funding, if we do go with something that has to be set up for construction aid, how can that be funded through any potential longitudinal savings that we will see from whatever we do, right? Can we make it, if we go that route, can we make it where, I mean, we may not have $6 billion to put in there now, but we might see this savings over the years and the cost of education, and that be flooded back into a construction fund that grows as the savings are realized. Again, don't know if there will be any savings necessarily. It just might be a stabilization, but just, that kind of thought looking at the funding.
Yeah, I guess I don't think there's any way to fund school construction at even the most minimal level without there being frankly, an appropriation for it, regardless of who's saving what dollars. And then then we are competing for everything just like everybody else, We might say we want $20 million a year. Meanwhile, we've got people sleeping outside in the middle of winter. Tough. That's the stuff where we have to deal with as a legislature at a much higher level.
So that would not be us, it would be Ways and Means that would.
It would be an
find this money, and
it would be an appropriation. But I think we heard testimony the other day from Chris Roop with JFO saying, his belief. I've always said, oh, hey, sports betting, let's take all that money and put it toward school construction, assuming it was going to solve the problem. And of course, it's yielded $6 million a year. And what his point of view is, if it is a priority of the state, it should be allocated in the budget proposal every year. Period. And then it is something that the governor should put in his budget.
Dedicated revenue stream.
No, he's just saying, I mean, just like, yeah, you pay for it. If it's a priority, then you pay for it. Please talk.
All right, well, since we keep
You're called on.
talking about districts, I'll just say all the uncomfortable things here this morning. When you look at the task force report, we have 118 districts in the state. 73 of them have an average daily membership under 500 students. I am obviously representing Williston and CVSD, and that is what I'm sent here to do, so I have to do that. It's challenging for me to see our inability to do some more strategic decisions, and instead a sweeping everybody has to change because that's the only way you can do hard things. CVSD may need to merge in time. 4,000 is huge by Vermont standards, but certainly not huge, obviously, by any other standard. But is there a benefit to, under the map we saw last week from the secretary, what do you gain if CVSD and South Burlington have to merge? What will all the costs be of merging those two? And what's really gained versus merging a lot of districts that are well under 500 students, or districts that are not operating and maybe sending. I find this a very difficult, awkward position to sit in and say, and who's to say someday there might be, if South Burlington and CVSD combine, it's not to close schools. Maybe someday it will be, but right now their enrollment is steady, and South Burlington they're falling out of the buildings and they're in trailers because they're overcrowded. So that's not the issue there. And I'm not saying this doesn't affect all of us, but I guess I want to own this is a really hard thing to sit in a big suburban district and represent them and look to the state interest and think about how we balance it. and in total shameless defense of myself, say that we debated and we took on some significant education legislation when I very first just got here 4 years ago in the weighting study and completely adjusting our weights and how we fund education. And I knew full well it was not what was good for my district in terms of money. It was a huge loss in tax capacity. We've lost 85 positions in 2 years. It has led to big cuts. But the principle that some kids are more expensive to educate and come to school with far more challenges, I absolutely understand from a visceral human level and educator level. And I acknowledge there is higher wealth on average in CVSD than in other communities. And that was the right thing to do statewide, even though it was a really hard thing. And will continue to be a hard thing and will impact now the things that go into the foundation formula. But I think we are also facing a challenging dynamic here when we look at mostly Chittenden County. Like, we don't have SUs where they're operating. We have several large-ish districts that merged under Act 46. My district, Janice district, and the Essex district. One thing I heard when I went to some of the task force open meetings was people saying, if you voluntarily merged under Act 46, and that work took a while. It was cumbersome. It's been good for our district. It saved a little bit, but it's been definitely good operationally. Then that you don't start there and make them start all over again. You at least take some of the big Act 46 mergers and leave those places intact. And so the representative of Williston and CVSD, I have to say I see some merit to that. So that is why I'm a little concerned when we talk about only being able to deal with, I think we do have really big issues about how we operate and tuitioning and other things, but I'm not entirely convinced the only way to take those on is to say we do everything all at once. I can see the simplicity of that thinking. I'm not sure that simplicity bears out in reality in the field, the idea of starting fresh. We don't really get to start fresh because the schools are already all there and they're going to have to operate every minute of the day through all of this. That helps nothing, but that's my purgatorial reality and big bad Northwest Vermont.
So I would just maybe continue along the line. We are talking about sort of, frankly, our lane, but the foundation formula is another thing that will be similar to weighting.
Yeah.
In districts, well, frankly, like mine, that are high spenders. I continue to come back to the issue of equity. I mean, I frankly have come around to the idea that our current system is in violation of Brigham because we have just got disparate spending on students across the state based on districts' either ability to pay or willingness to pay for education. But moving to it, so I believe in moving to a foundation formula. I think it's better for the ability to plan long term. But I also support that, knowing full well my district is, let's see, we have long-term weighted is 13.9. I think we're 17 or something. So it's going to be a painful transition, depending on the profile of our students. So, we are all stuck in this position of sort of protecting our turf and doing what's right for the state as a whole. And I realize that defining what's right is also a hard discussion as well. Yeah. And then Janet, please.
Just quickly on two things pop into my head. First, my district also, just for clarity, we all talk about our regions and we should be doing that. We should be focusing on the constituents we represent. But, I have the same sort of situation, just on a different scale than Representative Brady was just talking about. My district did merge when others around we didn't. So we went from multiple small towns and a regional union high school to a K-12 district. And that was voluntary, and it was a lot of work and discussion to get to that point. Is it right now? No, I mean, none of this is right now. I want to just talk for one sec, though, about the foundation formula and I'm, you know, this isn't a judgment of the foundation formula. It is my perception of it as time has gone on and the work that we've been engaged in over the last year. You mentioned about allowable growth, and I have a ton of background with allowable growth, as you do too, Peter, but I have been trying to help my constituents understand the difference in philosophy that this funding formula really is. And it is hard for folks to grasp. And it means one heck of a lot more toward a allowable growth or a cap on spending than the current system is now. And I say that because I want to be very realistic, because we are currently, in general, and I'm talking in, you know, the concept, we now budget locally to our student needs. That's what we do. And in fact, I for years have gone to the superintendent and said, develop a draft budget for the board that meets student needs, you know, and then we usually have a parameter around that. But that isn't how we'll be budgeting from in the future under a foundation formula. It literally is, we'll have dollars and we will have to budget to those dollars. And I just want to make sure that we're acknowledging that there's a cap that we will have to face. It is weighted and it is thoughtful and it is different than the foundation formula we had in the past, but it is, you know, a different way of thinking. And I say all that because it drives much of my thought around how we govern them. Because now we have a new philosophy of funding, so now we have to think of a new philosophy on governing. And I know that conversation has shifted recently, especially this year, from lowering property tax rates, which was gonna again say that was what I heard over and over and over again, and I still hear it over and over and over again. We are going through this exercise to lower property tax rates because people cannot afford to stay in their homes. I think that's a generally accepted perception for most Vermonters. And we talked about that a lot. We've now gone to saying that it's bending the cost curve and it's, you know, it may not save money. And I think, you know, that's a fair assumption as well. But the goals of, you know, should have always been on how do we deliver the best education we can for our kids. And that should be our goal behind any future steps that we take. So I just want to keep all that in mind as I'm supporting. I mean, we've gone around the table here and I agreed with something what everyone said. So I actually think that we're in a pretty good place to make some good steps. I guess a question I would have is, it's something that you brought up about time. And are we willing to take some thoughtful steps on adjusting timelines where necessary to make sure we're doing the right thing? And then so one last thing, and then I'm gonna stop. I think you're the one who brought it up, Representative Brown, about well, others did too, about the shared services. I am much less worried about the duplication of levels of governance than some people are. I guess it's because maybe I'm already in one and I'm already seeing, you know, benefits or hearing benefits from those who are in the field. And I think that we absolutely need, regardless of, it's sort of a layer above, regardless of how we move forward with consolidation. I think it's critically important that we consider and even mandating. I don't know what it looked like, but mandating.
Guys, two things in response. One, the things you said about budgeting and all that were great preview for our testimony at 1:15. So remember those thoughts. But two, I just, and I'm not trying to be a spokesperson for the agency or the governor or anything, but you know, I think the Secretary of Education would sit there and say, this is also about improving student outcomes. So it's, it's frankly, it's about everything. But sometimes we focus on one area, then we move on to focus to other areas. Is that a hand up?
Yes, you said it. I respectfully disagree. I think that the only thing in it that is about improving quality and outcomes for kids is the potential for regional middle and high schools because of increased opportunity. Otherwise, the way you improve education and educational outcomes is teacher quality. It is, that is what matters for, and we don't have a strategic vision for it. We didn't follow through on Act 173 on it. I read that as a teacher and was like, oh my God, yes, we need this. I need this. I need to better know how to educate kids who come into my class in high school and can't read or have X, Y, and Z needs. And I haven't received much of that training, but I don't think that this is about quality other than what is already gained in putting more students together, where there appears to be much more research about that. There's obvious reasons at the middle and high school level. You can offer more. You have a more variety of perspectives and kids, and then you have more offerings. And so I think that the biggest quality for kids part of all of this is regional middle and high schools. I am frustrated to hear the rhetoric around improving outcomes because I don't think that happens no matter how big or small your school is without a lot more vision, leadership, and investment in teacher quality.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I've been thinking about that as well too. I think when we talk about, what's this all about, has that conversation has strategically shifted depending on who's speaking over time. And so I think we all sort of know how this started. And I feel like, yes, we can say it's about educational opportunities for kids, but until we really dig into that conversation and talk about what it actually means in practice for kids, I think it's just messaging. Explain.
I mean, I will restate my position that equitable funding is about providing opportunity for kids. And right now, we just don't have it. Much of what we do here is allocating money in the best strategic way possible. So sometimes it is all about the money and how it's distributed.
But we can have equitable funding and still not have an equitable system. We can.
All right, we'll break for lunch. And we will continue this discussion at 2 or so.